Thank you very much. So I live in Georgia, but I'm originally from India. It's hot, it's poor, people speak English with a funny accent. Those were my first impressions of the South. I moved here in the mid-90s, and my first roommate said, you know, racism is still a problem in the South. And I thought he was going to say sometimes there are riots and thousands of people kill thousands of other people, because that's how we roll in India. But he said sometimes someone opens their front door and finds a burning cross on their lawn. And I thought, in India, if I opened my front door and found a burning cross on my lawn, my first reaction would be, holy shit, I have a lawn! Yesterday, this was merely a hallway. How did this happen? I don't really get the symbolism of the burning cross. Was there some kind of KKK meeting where the Grand Wizard said, all right, we need to take a pagan symbol like fire, and we need to take a Christian symbol like the cross, and we need to put them together so it's completely unambiguous that we hate black people. Fire itself is such a fickle metaphor. You know, like, if you're fired up, that's good, but if you get fired, that's not medium good. And if something is lit, that's awesome, but if you get burned by an experience, that's bad. So no one ever gets burned by something that's lit. And then if you're on fire metaphorically, that's amazing. If you're on fire literally the worst thing that can happen to you. How did that happen? I think my second reaction if I saw a burning cross on my lawn would be, is Jesus killing himself again? Because if Jesus is God and God controls everything, it was suicide the first time, right? I mean, plus if God controls everything, Jesus was also responsible for his own birth, which means Jesus is the ultimate control freak. Why so many jokes about Jesus, you ask? I was raised Catholic. Any other Catholics? Any ex-Catholics? All right, give it up for Catholicism. Give it up for Lent. Yeah, I had the typical Catholic upbringing, went to Sunday school, heard all the stories about Jesus and the 7 dwarves. 12. Although really, if a drug gang had 12 members and one of them was a narc, wouldn't you say they were 11? Spoiler alert, Judas turns out not to be an apostle. Sorry if you're just getting into that. But, yeah. Sometimes I wonder if Judas actually didn't commit suicide because he was ashamed, but just because he figured he would run into post-resurrection Jesus, and that would be a whole gospel of awkward right there. Anyway, I realized that religion is different in America when I moved here in the mid-90s because there were WWJD stickers on all these bumpers everywhere. You may recall WWJD stands for God Loves Acronyms. It actually stands for What Would Jesus Do? And I thought, well, one thing Jesus wouldn't do is use an acronym, so you're already kind of screwing up here. I mean, it was confusing to me, and I thought if Jesus had a car and he had a bumper sticker, the bumper sticker would probably say, there once was a man who had 3 sheep, and then the bumper sticker would wrap around the whole car, so you would find out what happened to the passenger side sheep, and the roadkill sheep, and the student driver sheep, because parables, right? Anyway, my name really is Chris Martin. My parents, being Catholic, wanted to name me after the saint on whose day I was born. That saint turned out to be Saint Cecilia, which was God's way of saying, comedian ahead. So they went with the day before, which was the Feast of Christ the King, and they figured they could lop off the T, so I became Chris the King. And it's been an advantage, because in America, no one mispronounces my name, which is an uncommon experience for an Indian. In India, my name was mispronounced only once, and it was by a substitute teacher, so I'm not sure why I was even paying attention. But she was taking roll, and she came to my name, and she said, Charas? Turns out that charas is the Hindi name for the resin of the ganja plant. So for the next 3 years, I had a dope nickname. Yep, it was a popular nickname for me. Yeah. Anyhow, there's also the matter of Chris Martin. I meet people for the first time and they're like, oh, Chris Martin, that's the same name as that cricket player from New Zealand. And I'm like, yeah, it's a celebrity name, what you gonna do? Yeah. There's also the matter of Coldplay, of course, the band that writes music for grocery stores. Yeah, I get quite a few Coldplay jokes. I'm not a fan of their music per se. I'd say their music leaves me a little lukewarm. But I have noticed that records are coming back in. Have you noticed that vinyl has now been in for about 10 years? And I don't quite get that. Is there some sort of trend where people are getting into technology that's considered old-fashioned now, but that 60 years ago was considered really out of date? I don't know, it's like, maybe you should make a time machine and go back and raid people's attics and get some stuff to the present. If I had a time machine, I would go back 30 years or so and just go up to random people and say, in the future there's going to be this box and it's going to deliver unlimited porn to you, and your boss is going to give you one for free. But only if you have a desk job, so don't actually go into the porn business. I also want to go up to random people from the 1980s and just say, 2 people, Donald Trump, Bill Cosby, 2 outcomes, convicted rapist, president. Guess who ends up winning? Because everyone would get that one wrong. My best explanation for Donald Trump is that someone tried to reincarnate George Carlin and gave up halfway. And I guess the deal with Donald Trump is he's trying to get us to buy into fascism. And fascism, well, it's not for everyone, by definition. It's not. I think we agree that our worst president, though, was Andrew Jackson, and we're taking him off the 20. I think we should just, to make a statement about race, I think we should keep Andrew Jackson on the 20 and put the Jackson 5 on the 100. We should also put the Jackson 5 on the 5, and every time you break a 5, you should just get Michael Jackson singles. Just as a reminder of what happened when they broke up. So, I was thinking about words lately. Do you remember The Secret? Do you remember that book?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that crock of book? I'd conveniently, thankfully, forgotten about it, and then I overheard 2 people talking about it on a podcast that I get, and they were talking about how the contents of the book were crap, and I thought, the title didn't put you off? A published book called The Secret? Like, that's a sign that the author doesn't know how to use words. Maybe, I don't know. If the book had a proper title, it would be something like, You Think You Can't Keep a Secret, Watch This. Or to be more contemporary, You Think You Can't Keep a Secret, Hold My Beer. I don't know. And I really don't get the Secret Service. Like, everyone knows who they are, everyone knows what they do, everyone knows what they look like. What's their secret? That they don't know how definitions work? I think if they really wanted to be incognito, they should just dress casually and call themselves the guys who are here to repair the Wi-Fi. Because that's a plausible excuse to be anywhere at any time nowadays. Yeah. I actually changed the Wi-Fi password at home a couple of days ago and didn't tell my wife. And then she took the Wi-Fi router and threw it down the garbage disposal. And then we had to sit down and have a conversation about how we need to find a better way to do S&M. Yeah. So that happened. So, any couples in the house? Where are my couples at? All right, a few couples out here. Where are my single people? Very nice, very nice. Where are my people who met their annual deductible this year?
Yeah.
All right. No. I'm sorry, man. I'm trying to get there. What about chronic diseases? Anyone with chronic diseases? Any kind of non-infectious chronic diseases? You're wondering why I ask. Well, I'm trying a new form of comedy. It's called polling. No, that's not it. As an Indian comic, I feel like I'm supposed to joke about how people suspect I'm a terrorist. But people don't suspect I'm a terrorist, they suspect I'm a doctor. I have resting doctor face. They suspect I'm a doctor, or Hispanic, or a spice. You know why there was never a band called the Spice Guys? Because that sounds like a restaurant. Now, to be fair, I've only been mistaken for Hispanic once, and it was by another Hispanic man. I don't know why I called him another Hispanic man. He was the only one. Yeah, that was a little weird. I don't mind being mistaken for a doctor. People assume I'm intelligent and rich and successful, which is a fantasy I share. I hope it is doctor, though. It could be, dentist, or it could be pharmacist. I don't know about pharmacists. I feel like pharmacists are the hillbillies of the medical world. Because if you're a pharmacist, you're like, I'm going to go to med school, but I don't want to work in a fancy, disinfected hospital. I want to work in a store. And not just a store, but like 1/7 of a store. Like, you walk up to a small wall of candy bars and I'll be behind it. Whatever works for you, man. Yeah, so I don't do many jokes about terrorism. I actually grew up near terrorists because my very early childhood I was in Saudi Arabia. My father worked there, and I was there till the age of 10, and it had its perks because the king of Saudi Arabia actually subsidizes television, so there are no commercials on TV. So I just grew up watching, the Knight Rider, the A-Team, all these shows just straight through, no commercial breaks, which was awesome. The cartoons were a little weird, though, because someone like Woody Woodpecker would come on and say, "We'll be right back after these messages," and the show would just keep going. And that happened once, and I thought, well, maybe it's an accident. And then it happened a second time, and that was, like the second jetliner hitting the World Trade Center. It's not a coincidence anymore. What, too soon? It's been 17 years. Yeah, it kept happening. Bugs Bunny said that, and then Porky Pig said that, and there's a word for this, gaslighting. And it was also weird that they called them messages, because I didn't know this. It took me 10 years to figure out they were talking about commercials. Like, SOS is a message. A 2-minute cereal commercial is not a message. Calling a 2-minute cereal commercial a message is like calling crack a food group. I mean, technically you ingest it, but I don't know about that. And I would love to do lots of jokes about terrorism, but I don't know much about jihadography. 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 Also terrorism, well, say what you will about Al-Qaeda, they at least had grand ambitious projects. Now terrorists, well, it's just about driving a vehicle into a crowd of people. So you can't differentiate a terrorist from a 2-star Uber driver. Also too soon. Yeah, I know some of you were just taking Uber. But yeah, I mean, and I like how just conventionally now we've decided that the lowest rating for an Uber is 2 stars. It's like maybe someday there's going to be a zombie apocalypse and your driver's going to be a zombie and you're like, this is what I've been waiting for, 1 star. Boring conversation turned me into a zombie. I guess that's how it's going to be. But I got married last year. I need to applaud my bravery, but thank you very much. I got married. And shortly after I got married, a friend of mine said, marriage is a wonderful institution. And I said, well, what other institutions have you been in? Jail, the mental asylum? I don't know. But my wife and I, we'd like to have kids, and I'm worried about having a daughter because she might want to be a princess, and I don't know how to explain to her that monarchy is not a good form of government. For several reasons. I mean, there's a succession problem, and then there are other problems too. I don't know how to explain it. Do you start with totalitarianism and work backwards? Or do you start with feudalism and work forwards? I mean, if you do the totalitarianism option, you can start with fascinating characters like Hitler and Stalin, but their biographies are 700 pages long. That seems like an imposition for a 7-year-old girl, don't you think? That's what I think. Anyway, we are trying to have kids, which means no more using birth control. I didn't realize I was buying condoms out of habit until I was at the gas station last week, and I pointed at the condoms like I needed them, and then realized I didn't need them anymore, so I pointed at something else and pretended I wanted that instead. So I'm smoking again. Also, not using birth control, it's weird, because when you're young, they say always be cautious, always use birth control, and then you're supposed to stop. Like, imagine you're a safe driver. Imagine every time you get in the car, you put on your seatbelt, you check your rearview mirror, you do this for 20 years, and one day you're like, fuck it, I'm gonna have a head-on collision. And then you keep driving, trying to have this collision, and you don't have one. You keep driving and driving. And you're like, what happened? Megan had a collision in her own driveway. All right, thank you everyone. I'm Chris Martin.
Hey, give it up for Chris Martin! Hey, fantastic. Well,